to Bloomberg West. I'm Emily Chang here with our editor-at-large, Corey Johnson. Obviously, since all of the NSA issues blew up, there have been a lot of questions about what we, as average consumers, can do to make ourselves more secure. So we decided to take a closer look at that.
Well, and I think the Target and the Neiman Marcus things as well, it shows you what your risks are as a consumer. It shows what your risks are as a business. I mean, Target really reeling from this thing, not just because of congressional hearings, but really suffering serious business risks.
Right, one of the biggest hacks in history. So we've got Chertoff Group Principal Brian White with us here to give us some of his tips and tricks to staying secure while online. Where does this start? What's the easiest thing that we can do?
Well, first, I think it's great that you're doing something like this, because many of the problems that we can, solve by just having consumers take control. In many ways, I think about this as consumers understanding what their risk is and doing some prudent, necessary steps to secure themselves. And by doing that, I think they can sleep a little bit easier about the cyber risk that they read about every day.
So, number one, you say email and passwords.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing. It's hard for me. It's probably hard for both of you. How do you do this? And what I say is you start with maybe your social media sites with one password and your banking sites with something else. You have to go ahead and think through upper lowercase letters, symbols and numbers. Those have become common. But we also have to be honest that those are very hard for many people to remember. So some are moving towards a passphrase, a word or a sentence that you just go ahead and use the first letters of each sentence as your password with a couple of numbers at the end.
So how many different passwords should we have?
I would say that you should have at least 3. I would use one for maybe when I'm on maybe a media site reading the news, another for my social media sites. Those I'd be increasingly concerned about. And then my most secure password I would put on my banking sites.
And in terms of using those sites, I mean, I feel like as people start to pick those sites, it's going to the strange, unusual site that starts to involve downloads or different pieces of software that starts to get funkier.
Yeah, and I think now you're hitting another issue that I think is important. And I almost say you need to, when you look at downloads, it's presume you're guilty. And presume that you should not click on it and you should not download it.
So then how do you figure out if you should?
I think you need to think about who sent you something. Why did they? Were you expecting it? And if they were, then you should go ahead and download that or save that and then click it open. And if anything's real suspicious, it's very easy to just copy that link and put it into your browser. And if that browser comes up, and type it in that way to see what comes back. Because oftentimes there's something in the middle and they're asking you to click through it so that they can put an exploit on your machine.
In other words, the link might say yahoo.com, and you click on it, it takes you to an Eastern European download site that you didn't expect.
Exactly, and where that's happening increasingly, a lot of the social media sites. So LinkedIn and Twitter, because we're using those sites so often, they do something to the actual address, you click on it, and then all of a sudden you have malware on your machine.
So you mentioned browser. Let's talk about browsers. What browsers should we use?
I think it's really Google Chrome is considered by most in security to be the most secure, but then you see Firefox and Internet Explorer, number 2 and number 3. And I think PC Magazine just had an article on this in March where they basically said it's very hard to tell the difference between all of them right now, but what is important is actually making sure that you're taking the updates.
What makes Chrome better?
It's a more stable platform. It was built on some open source code, and it does have the ability to incorporate more security features and protocols, even how it opens up PDF documents. But again, I think it's important that you have to make sure you do the updates. So when you see the updates come across your desktop or even on your phone, take that update down, because if you're using an outdated version, for instance, of Internet Explorer, Chrome, or Firefox, those are not secure.
Now, speaking of specific sites, once you get on that browser, which sites are most secure? I know there's this difference between HTTPS and HTTP, and not everyone has HTTPS, which is more secure, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's HTTPS is quickly becoming the de facto standard. And so what that does is it actually enables encryption between the browser and the other browser. And this is very important in that the data as it moves is encrypted. That is something that you see on banking sites, and that has been adopted elsewhere. So make sure when you're on sites, HTTPS, and if you don't see that, then be very reticent about what you actually do online.
We're in this fairly amazing day when Windows XP is going to stop being supported by Microsoft, and yet, as we just learned, 18% of all world's business is done on Windows XP. And I wonder, What are the best practices for a company to make sure that they're not exposing users who just do some personal work? I know it's shocking, but some people actually check Facebook during the day or their personal email from their work computers. What are the best practices for a business to be reasonable about ways to insist that these things happen in the workplace?
I think that what you have to think about is how your network is architected and segment the risk of individuals. And for example, you have to assume that your employees are going to hit those sites. So let's be concerned about what is actually leaving the network. Make sure that the browsers that you deploy and how you push software is always up to date, because it's your responsibility as the administrator to make sure that the employee is using up-to-date software.
Now, what about your phone? You may get the HTTPS on the desktop. Do you get that on your phone? How do you, if you're on mobile, what other additional steps can you take, or are you more vulnerable?
So first and foremost, mobile. Make sure you have a PIN. Make sure you're enabled to lock the actual device. Don't just keep it open so somebody can take it. Also, make sure that you go ahead and put on your geolocation, even though that may drain a little bit of battery, because that enables you to perhaps erase the device when you lose it. And probably the most important thing is don't download applications directly from a site. Always move through the application store, whether that's the Apple App Store or the Android App Store, because those app stores are both developed to actually look at each application to see if there's any bad code in those apps.
Interesting. Okay. Thanks so much for doing this for us. Security 101. It's amazing how many people don't do these.
Now I'm just scared.
Very easy, simple, obvious steps. Brian White of the Chertoff Group, thanks so much for joining us here on Bloomberg.